Hey everybody, come on in, grab a spot. I want to welcome you again. It's really good to see you. My name is Chris Harry. I'm one of the staff with Claremont Christian Fellowship, together with my wife Lorraine, who's back there. Also, we have a daughter, Audrey, who's helping out over here. And we've been doing this for a long time. So Lorraine and I were involved in an earlier iteration of this community when we were students at Pomona College over 20 years ago. You are all the reason that we're still doing this. So we love you, we love getting to know you, and I would really like to get to know you. So if I don't meet you tonight, I hope to meet you soon. And I like to be available to people. I know Lorraine does too, but if you ever want to talk, if you ever have some things you're working through and you just need someone to listen, I'd be really happy to meet up with you. I'll even treat you to boba or coffee or something. So just hit me up and we'll meet up. It'd be great. All right, so let me start off tonight by asking you a question. Why are you here? Why are you in this place at CCF right now? And what are you hoping to get from a community like this one? When I came to college, I already knew what I wanted from a Christian group. I wanted some Christian friends, I wanted a Christian girlfriend, and I wanted a Christian space carved out in my schedule in my campus life because my faith was really important to me. And it had been in high school and I wanted it to continue in college. I got all three of those, by the way, so all worked out pretty well. There was one more reason that I had for wanting to be part of a Christian group. Have any of you watched that movie, God's Not Dead? So I have not watched it. It came out a long time after I went to college. But I'm aware of the plot. And here's the summary by someone who never saw the movie of the first part of the movie's plot. You've got this Christian college student, and he takes a philosophy class where the professor hates Christianity. And the professor makes all these cases against Christianity and ultimately requires that to pass his class, you have all the students, each student has to sign a declaration that God is dead if they want to pass in grade in his class. And this Christian student stands up to the prof. They end up having a series of debates, and the student pretty definitively wins the debates, much to the professor's shame. And then there's more to the story, apparently. That's a pretty outrageous example. This is like coming straight from the land of severe Christian persecution complex, right? Like, I can't imagine any professor, even if they were very anti-Christian, requiring you to say God is dead to pass their class. It's a little absurd. Sort of a straw man, I think, argument. So I wasn't expecting something like that when I came to college. But I was on my guard, because I'd heard a lot of things about how my faith might be challenged. And I wanted to make sure that I had the supports I needed to handle it. I had reason for concerns. In my high school experience, my faith had been kind of a roller coaster, up and down. Sometimes there were these beautiful moments of connection with God, where my sense of knowing Jesus got me through loneliness and sadness and anxiety and carried me through these times. And then there were other times where God felt far away. And when God felt far away, the whole thing started to seem kind of implausible. And I began to wonder, am I making a mistake? And then this terrible feeling of loss would come over me because of how much I loved God and what I had, and the fear that I might lose those things. I remember one time, I don't know, often my feelings like this would be triggered by like getting stuck on some issue, like some question I couldn't answer, or something about the Christian faith where I'm like, maybe that doesn't work. And I was in one of those funks, and I was feeling like I was sort of spinning out of control, and I was losing my faith, and I didn't know what to do. It was nighttime, and I just told my mom, I'm going out for a walk. And I went out and started walking around the block in my neighborhood. And where I'm from the Menlo Park in the Bay Area, and you can see more stars there because there's bay and stuff nearby. It's not as much light pollution. And I remember walking and looking up at the stars and thinking about the vastness of space and talking to God. And my words to God turned into prayer. It was prayer. It started to turn into song. And then I found myself just walking around my block singing this worship song. and feeling close to God again. And it was, in my mind, this encapsulation of like the lows and the highs, like all together in that one moment. So I tried to get around those issues with faith. I tried to beef up my faith by learning as much as I could in high school. I read the Bible. I read books that explain Christianity and Christian beliefs. I read a lot of apologetics books. Those are the ones that teach you how to defend your faith and why all these beliefs make sense and the evidence for them. And I actually got pretty good at explaining my faith and answering challenging questions from my non-Christian friends, and my skeptical dad would have these back and forths, and I was like, yeah, but I thought about that, but I thought about that. And all those pieces were together, but it didn't stop the funks of doubt that would sometimes come over me. So coming into college, one of my big concerns was, what's going to happen to me here? Will I be able to hold on to this faith I have? Or will I lose it? Will it be challenged and I'll give up on it? Will it diminish in some way and be only a shadow of what I know now? Now, you may not identify with the experiences I had coming into college, but I suspect we all wrestle with faith and doubt in some way. Even if you're like on the fence about Christianity, even if you're coming in from more of an agnostic or an even atheistic perspective, those questions of, is there a greater reality or not, I think they're live for most of us in some way. And some of us have been taught that those are good and bad, right? Faith is really good and doubt is really dangerous. Or in the switch, in some families, it's, no, doubt is great, challenge everything, and faith is for idiots, right? Like, so people come from all kinds of perspectives on this, but in some way we're all working through it. My talk tonight is about faith, doubt, and mystery. And I want to present a different, and I think more Christ-like understanding of what faith is. And I hope this perspective on faith will help us flourish more and worry less about doubt. And better sustain a faith that can last through a whole life of walking with God. Before I get into that more, I want to have you turn to one or two people next to you, and I just want you to discuss with each other, what messages have you received about faith and doubt in your life? From family, from church, from whatever it is. What messages have you heard about faith and doubt? Go ahead. I love the conversation. All right, if you're in the middle of a good conversation, hold where you are, remember that, and come back to it when we're at the end of the meeting, and pick up that conversation then. All right, we're going to talk about faith, and then we're going to talk about doubt, and I'll throw in a little bit about mystery at the end. But if we're going to talk about faith, we need to first figure out, what do we even mean when we're talking about faith? Anyway, if we look up faith in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, you would find a series of definitions. And one of the most relevant ones for Christians might be this one: belief in the traditional doctrines of a religion. So this is the sense in which faith is a collection of things that we believe. If we tried, we could make a list. So maybe a lot of Christians in the room might make a list, something like this: I believe Jesus is the Son of God. I believe he died for our sins. And we keep going. I believe the Bible is a source of truth about God. We might get really obscure. I believe in a Trinity where God is three persons in one, and keep going about all the pictures of an afterlife. And we might end up with actually a pretty long list of all the things that we believe. And we might end up, as we make this long list, getting into past the stuff that we think about a lot and we're pretty comfortable with, into the things where we're less sure about them, right? Well, and I think I'm supposed to believe this, but I haven't even really thought about that very deeply. What do I think about this? But we'd end up with like a big list. And this brings us to another of the definitions in the dictionary, which is, faith is a firm belief in something for which there is no proof. And here's where we start to have a problem. Because it's a firm belief in something for which there is no proof. But it's hard to believe in things that don't have a lot of proof. And some of them that we've really spent some time thinking through and owning are easier for us to hold on to. But as we go down that list and get to other things, we might find there's things like, I don't know if I'm firm on that. What does that even mean? And where should my list end? At what point is my list of the things a Christian should believe complete, and the things that are optional begins, or the things that people disagree about? And then if you go back into Christian history, you find out that people disagree about almost everything, right? So it's like, where do these lines get drawn? I think a lot of Christians have secret shame about the lack of firmness of their faith. Am I the only one here who isn't sure I totally believe this thing I'm singing with everyone standing next to me right now? Is this really the best way to think about faith? I think this understanding of faith has actually been more shaped by the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, philosophical movements in Western Europe, than it was by Jesus and the early Christians. So here you go, once again, the way that we think and the culture around us has been heavily shaped by a bunch of dead white guys. Beginning especially in the 17th century, philosophers like Descartes and others organized truth into a series of claims that could then be evaluated based on evidence and reason. And for Descartes, he started the very basics, right? His thing was, I'm going to start with the thing that I cannot deny. I think, therefore I am. I know that I exist because I think. And then he attempted to build essentially a framework to understand, to be able to justify all knowledge based on reasoning out from that one point of view. However successful you think he was about that project, that was the idea, right? That truth can be boiled down into a bunch of statements that you can then defend or not based on evidence and reason. And around the same time, in the mid-1600s, this Enlightenment approach came to be applied to the Christian faith as well. So in 1649, the Church of England got together and created the Westminster Confession of Faith, which is still really valued by many denominations that have a history of using, going back to it, including the one I grew up in, the Presbyterian Church. This statement of faith is 205 doctrinal statements in paragraph form of all the things that the church believed were part of the confession of a Christian, the things that you were supposed to believe as a Christian. So do you confess Christian faith? Then here's 205 things you're supposed to agree with. And to help people learn them and understand the basis for them, because all of our ideas have to be supported, they created two catechisms or training books, the larger and the smaller. The larger catechism is 196 questions and answers, Q&A. What is the purpose of humanity? Why, and then answers for these things. Don't worry if you're a young person and you don't want to go into the hardcore seminary level. The shorter catechism is just 107 questions for the kids. Even today, many churches and denominations, college campus ministries, have statements of faith, which they post on their websites, listing the 20, 30, 40, I don't know how many things that they believe as a church. These are the things that we confess as part of our Christian faith. And they're important enough that we want you to see it on our website before you come to our church, so you know if you agree with what we believe here. So in other words, faith is now something that can be defined as a list of convictions you can write down on a piece of paper. But Jesus seemed to have a very different understanding and view of faith. Let's look at this story from his life. When Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around there that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door. And he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and having dug through it, they let down the mat on which the man lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Child, your sins are forgiven." Now let's think, what do these men know about Jesus on the way here? Keep in mind, this is the very beginning of the 2nd chapter of Mark. Almost nothing has happened so far in the Gospel of Mark. Jesus has just begun his ministry, just begun his teaching. The people who will learn from him, the ones who are not like the crowds, but the ones who are actually going to understand, hopefully, his teachings, haven't even been fully gathered yet. He's collected 4 of them. So he hasn't even built his 12 disciples and all that other community around him. And as we learn and we read through Mark, and they don't get anything he's saying at all for a long time. For most of Mark, they're completely clueless and don't understand anything he's teaching about anything. But not only that, Jesus has not mentioned to anybody yet that he is God's son. He hasn't told anybody yet that he will die or that he will be resurrected. He has not even mentioned forgiving sins until this moment. this is the first time he says anything about forgiveness of sins. And we're not going to read it, but in the next section, the religious leaders freak out when he says this, because that's a blasphemy. Only God can forgive sins. In other words, the guys who bring their friend to Jesus know none of the doctrinal statements that we would consider key and core to traditional historic Christian faith. They're just there in the town. They don't even repent of sin, right? They just did breaking and entering, and they're proud of it, right? They don't say a word. And Jesus says to the man, not even the one friends, the ones who are showing the faith, to the guy, your sins are forgiven. He sees faith. What is he seeing? The story shows us what it is that he sees. These guys believe Jesus can heal their paralyzed friend. Why do they believe that? One thing Jesus has done so far in the first chapter of Mark is he's healed a lot of people. And as soon as he starts miraculously healing people, other people start coming. The word gets out, and people are coming in. Well, that's a major reason for the crowds, is people trying to get healed. And then they also stay and listen to things that he's teaching. No one's been healed yet who's been paralyzed, though. At least not that we've seen in the text. But these guys who love their friend, we don't know how the friend became paralyzed. They love their friend, and they think, that guy, he can do it. Let's bring our friend to Jesus. And so they go, they pick him up. There's a bunch of them. It says 4 of them carry the mat. Presumably there's more. They get this mob, they bring their friend on this mat, they get to the house, and it's so packed with people they can't even get to the front door. So they go up the ladder on the side of the house. These houses would have had a sort of patio on top that people could hang out on, and a ladder. I don't know how you get a guy up a ladder like that, but they get their friend up the ladder onto the roof, and then they just start digging through the roof of this house. All right, switch scenes. We're inside the house now. Meanwhile, in the building, Jesus is talking, and suddenly there's these scratching noises on the roof. Super distracting, right? Everyone's looking up, and little particles are falling down, right? And then more, and everyone's like, what's going on? And then someone breaks through the clay and like straw and other stuff up there, and you see hands poking through it and pulling at this roof, right? And now people in the room are probably shouting, stop it! Like, what are you doing? One interesting thing is it's possible this is Jesus' own house or his family's house because he's in his hometown, right? So like, you're damaging the rabbi's house, but whether or not it is, right? And then, how do you lower somebody on a mat from above into a room? It must have just been the most awkward thing, trying to lower. So this whole operation is happening in front of Jesus. And Jesus looks up into the hole, into this commotion, sees these friends lowering their buddy down, and he sees faith. And he pronounces the man's sins forgiven. And in case you're wondering, in the next part, he also heals him. And when the guy walks out with his mat, everyone again just freaks out. This is the kind of faith that is repeatedly celebrated in the Gospels. Jesus passes by a tax collector working in a tax booth, says to him, follow me. And the man leaves the life he knows to follow Jesus. A woman comes to Jesus believing that if she just touches his robe, she will be healed of the condition that has ruined her life for 12 years. Jesus tells her, daughter, your faith has made you well. An insurrectionist, crucified next to Jesus, hanging on the cross next to Jesus and his cross, who didn't follow Jesus in life, who just tried to lead a bloody resurrection and got caught by the Romans, probably knows very little. But out of what he knows, he says to Jesus, facing death, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus tells him, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Faith in the Gospels, and a faith that Jesus responds to and celebrates, is people desperately looking to Jesus for what they need, for healing and hope and belonging. Faith belongs to needy people who don't have all the answers, who don't have it figured out. And that desperation, that hope, focuses in, I think this guy has it. That's the faith that Jesus rewards and responds to. The only people in the Gospels who are portrayed as being sure about all the things that they believe are the religious leaders who oppose Jesus and that he's constantly sparring with. Now, a number of New Testament scholars, looking at this word faith, looking at it in its context, the Greek word pistis, and looking at the context, will argue that we shouldn't be translating this word as faith anymore. That word has become so loaded with that meaning that assumption we're talking about intellectual agreement with a bunch of ideas. And they feel like that's so far from what the gospel word is getting at that they suggest using something completely different. Words like trust. Jesus talks about the coming kingdom of God a lot. That's he teaches about God's kingdom coming near. So they talk about words like allegiance to Jesus or the king, loyalty. I love the idea coming out of these things of opting in, participating with Jesus, leaning in to who Jesus is. Faith is more relational than intellectual. Faith is an orientation towards someone, not a belief about someone. In other words, it's more about who you know than what you know. Now, this doesn't mean that beliefs are unimportant. They obviously affect everything about who we think God is and who we think we are and how we think we're supposed to live. And obviously, if you're trying to follow God, you're going to want to learn as much about who God is as you can. But that collection of beliefs is separate, is secondary to the kind of faith we're talking about here. The primary aspect of faith is leaning in trust, in belonging, and saying, I'm going towards you, God. I wish I understood this about faith a lot sooner. It would have saved me so much pain and struggle in my life. For me, every time I question any single belief, it threw my whole faith into like a tailspin. If I have a question about, can I really believe in a punishment of hell? Or can I really accept the Bible if these two parts of the Bible seem to contradict each other? And that one question would just spiral into more and more questions, and suddenly, do I even believe? That's an unstable place to be, because we always are going to have questions. You're always going to come into things that counter and contradict and force you to rethink the ways that you picture God and the world and yourself. And we can't control our beliefs or our doubts. Have any of you tried this before? Like a doubt's coming on and you're like, I'm not going to doubt, right? Or you have some belief and you're being challenged and then you start white-knuckling it to hold on to that belief, right? It's like, I will believe this, But you can't actually force your brain to accept something it doesn't want to accept. You can just try to trick yourself or suppress in some way. It's still in there. It's still fighting to get out. But you can choose? You can choose to orient toward God. You can choose to lean into God. You can choose to say, I don't know what I feel right now or think about these things, but I want more. I want to go in this direction, God. You can choose where your allegiance lies. We can lean in. This is why doubt is not always a bad thing. I have lost sleep trying to hold on to beliefs that deserved to be tossed overboard out of my life. In high school, some of those apologetics books that I read convinced me that I had to believe that evolution was a lie in order to believe other things that the Bible, like things that the Bible said, even though the Bible doesn't say anything about evolution. But I had to believe that evolution was a lie if I was going to accept the Bible as the Word of God. And that was a hard thing to hold on to. There's a lot of evidence for evolution. I'm pro-evolution. But that false dichotomy deserved to be doubted. It deserved to be questioned. Because whatever you think about evolution of the Bible, it's certainly not the case that you have to believe that evolution is a lie in order to accept the Bible as true. Some things should be doubted. Many things should be questioned and re-examined and relearned. But what do we do if it's our very belief in God that's under question? What if that's the part that how do I turn to God when the thing I'm having the hardest time with is I don't even know if you're there, God. How do I do this? I'm really encouraged by this interaction later in the Gospel of Mark between this father and Jesus. So this dad comes to Jesus because his son is sick and has problems, and he wants healing for his son. And he says to Jesus, if you are able to do anything, help us. There's a few, I'm cutting out some dialogue, but if you're able to do anything, help us. And Jesus says, all things are possible for him who believes. So the man says, I believe, help my unbelief. This is not that same level of roof-tearing certainty we saw earlier, right? This is a person who is desperate, but is not sure that Jesus can do it. And the best he's able to come up with is, I believe, help my unbelief. And Jesus heals his son. Sometimes that's the best we can do. God, I don't know if you're there right now. Help me believe you're there. That is a prayer, right? The Psalms are full of prayers like this. God, I'm mad at you. It feels like you abandoned me. That's a prayer. When you take it to God, you are orienting yourself toward God. That is an act of faith, even though it sounds like an act of doubt. Sometimes we confuse fear for faith. Sometimes the vision of faith we have, the certainty about a bunch of convictions, we're like, that looks like faith. My pastor is so full of faith. These people at my church are so full of faith. My church is so full of faith, nobody doubts anything. And what we're doing sometimes is we're confusing faith and fear. Often when people hold most tightly to that set of beliefs they have, defending them against everything that could attack them, every possible argument against them, that world out there, protecting themselves from that world out there, that's not an act of faith, that's an act of fear. We're afraid we're going to lose something valuable. We're afraid of the world. We're afraid of anything that could hurt our faith. And so we circle the wagons. We scold that kid in Sunday school who asked too many hard questions, right? Have some faith and be quiet. We warn kids when they go to college, watch out that they don't sap your faith away. Watch out for those professors. I saw that movie. I recently heard a podcast this woman was sharing about how when her dad found out she was going to go to a non-Christian college instead of a Christian one, required him to read the book, How to Keep Your Faith in College, which is a book. And any critique of the group, even from the inside of the population of that church or community, any critique of the culture, of the leadership, of how things operate is a threat because it could upset that delicate balance, that delicate belief that we are all acting the ways we are because of the things we believe, which are all true, and our leaders all believe them, and that's why they do what they do. Which is why people get shouted down when they raise allegations against an abusive pastor, because it's too disruptive to what we need this thing to mean. Which is why marginalized people of color, when they try to talk about how this community isn't working great for everybody, get shut down and pushed to the side. This is why so many of us, so many other queer people that we know in our lives, in their churches, had to hide who they were, their gender identity and sexuality, because to reveal that would suddenly become that point of controversy that is upsetting the faith of the church, and you would have a target on your back. And so many people I know have had to hide. All of this comes not from faith, but from fear of losing. Faith is trusting Jesus that it's going to be okay. Putting our trust in God, that God is bigger than all of these things. God is bigger than the world, God is bigger than college, God is bigger than a mean professor. And once we accept that God is big, and that we trust God, and that all truth ultimately belongs to God, we're free to study and research, dive into those controversial topics, learn from people who have wildly different perspectives from us. We can even do those things while leaning into Jesus, right? All right, Jesus, let's go talk to that atheist down the hall. Not to convert, but to learn, right? Let's hear what this person has to say. Let's engage. And then afterwards, okay, I don't know what to do with some things that person said. I've got some thinking to do, right? All of this leaves room for the last thing I wanted to point out very briefly. For the beautiful, critical concept of mystery. This concept has been more or less driven out of Western Christianity by our desire for certainty. Mystery is simply the recognition that God is big and we are small. We do not and cannot comprehend all of who God is, how God really works, how this world really operates at its deepest, most fundamental levels. We can seek in, we can probe in, but there's going to be this mystery. Our brains are too small at a certain point. And that's good, because mystery leaves space for awe and wonder for the God who is too big to understand sometimes. I don't know if any of you like quantum physics. I love to read about and learn about quantum physics. I am not a physicist. I don't understand quantum physics, and that's why I'm bringing it up right now. Because quantum physics boggles my freaking brain to where I don't know what to do with it. We all know that a photon, like a smallest amount of light, can function both as a what and a what? a particle and a wave, right? Which is weird when you think about it, because waves have frequencies and form interference patterns, and particles are single things, and somehow it's both. Electrons function the same way. A single electron can exist in two different spaces at the exact same time. Literally, it's in two places at once, unless you try to measure it. And the moment you measure it, it drops into a single spot. It's called superposition. I'm probably explaining all this wrong. This is my best shot at it. How about this? Subatomic particles can become entangled with each other. And then you can move them vast distances apart. And whatever is true of one particle will be true of the other particle. They'll keep the same state, even though there's no obvious way how they're communicating with each other. For all intents and purposes, they are the same particle in two different places. Einstein called that spooky action at a distance, because it's just weird. How does this stuff work? As Richard Feynman, a famous physicist, once said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. What about the God who made quantum mechanics? If we can't even understand, conceptualize how part of the physical world works, how are we going to comprehend God? At some point we just have to say, you're bigger than me. I know as much as I can, but I know ultimately my knowledge is probably like this compared to this, and a lot of it's probably wrong. It lets us hold our beliefs humbly and freely. It lets us be learners at the feet of God. And then recognizing that in the midst of all that, this confusing, awe-inspiring God comes to meet us where we are and invites us to lean in, to opt in, to be with. So I want to end by inviting us tonight to lean in. I've got a couple ways for us to think about that. First, I want to invite you to lean into God together with other people. Would love for you to do it in this community here. If you're new here, we're a community that is committed to walking with each other in this journey of trying to know God and exploring all the hard questions and wrestling with things. We get into all that stuff. This is a community where you can be open about your doubts and your questions. And if you're new, I want to invite you to join us in that journey of awe and wonder and confusion and sometimes frustration and wrestling things out and loving each other through it. For those of you who are returning to us and you already know you want to be part of this community, I might invite you to think about, are there ways you want to do community differently this year? Maybe joining a community group if you haven't done it before. Maybe coming more regularly to things like the community group or this or something else so you can really build deep relationships. Now I want to say, of course, you're always welcome to go anywhere else, and we will not resent it or hold it against you if you join one of the other cool Christian communities on the campus. You're still welcome to come back here, even if one other place is sort of like your main home. But I want to give you that invitation. My second invitation is to reiterate Jesus' own one. That invitation to lean in and opt in. Maybe some of you have wanted to for a long time, but you've had doubts. I don't know if I can follow God because I don't know if I can believe it all. I've got some hang-ups. Hopefully this talk has helped with some of that. That faith isn't about having all those things figured out. You actually start leaning in and then figure that other stuff out as you go. Maybe you'd like to do that tonight. Maybe you'd like to embrace mystery. For some of us, opting in might mean embracing mystery for the first time. A new way of engaging with faith that has room for questions and uncertainty. For some of us who've been trying to lean into Jesus and follow him for a while, the question might be, what does that look like for me this year? You've been through this, some of you, before. You know how challenging and weird it can be to try to follow God in college. What do you want to do this year to kind of open your life and experience more of God in this place? I encourage you to find out what actually works for you. If you're burned out on something else, that's fine. Don't do that thing. Burned out on daily quiet times? Don't do daily quiet times. Try going for walks and being present to God. Something else. I strongly believe in the adage, pray as you can, not as you can't. Because you can't. Or maybe for some of us leaning in might mean actually engaging with those doubts that we've been hiding from. Stop suppressing them and just say, all right, it's open season. What do I think about this question? I'm happy to do that with you. Let's go have coffee and talk about your big questions. I probably have them too, and we can have a nice conversation about it. Learn together. All right, those are the invitations. I'm going to pray right now and give us an opportunity to respond to God.